For 5 years, I was the ghost in the machine at Archer and Thorne, one of the most prestigious architecture firms on the West Coast. If you've seen a skyscraper defy gravity in the city's skyline, or a museum that looks more like a sculpture than a building, chances are we had a hand in it. Or rather, I had a hand in it. My boss, Gideon Thorne, the son of the firm's founder, was the face. He was everything a lead architect was supposed to be in the movies: charming, charismatic, with a jawline that could cut glass, and a voice that made clients sign multi-million-dollar contracts on the spot. He was also a brilliant thief, not of money or objects, but of something far more valuable: ideas. My ideas. When we landed the landmark Civic Center project, the one that would redefine the city's entire downtown core, it was my concept. It was born from my sleepless nights, fueled by stale coffee and an almost obsessive passion. It was my vision, sketched out in my personal moleskine with my own ink pens, long after everyone else had gone home. He presented it as his own. He stood in front of the city council, the investors, the press, and he spun a tale of his own solitary genius. When I quietly tried to assert my contribution, he pulled me aside later, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. He told me, "Alara, your role is to support, not to lead." He said it with a placid kindness that felt more like a threat. So I resigned. It's funny how a single sentence can sever a 5-year-long chain of loyalty. I gave my 2 weeks' notice, citing personal reasons. Gideon was almost magnanimous about it, probably relieved. The ghost was willingly vacating the machine. He had no idea the ghost was about to haunt him. And I know what you're thinking: another story about a terrible boss. We've all had them. But stick with me for a minute, because this story isn't just about a bad boss, it's about the quiet power you don't even know you have. If you've ever been made to feel small, or had your work stolen, or been told your job was to support someone else's dream, then I need you to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void, that there are other people out there who get it. People who know what it's like to build something beautiful, only to have someone else put their name on it. On my last day, the air in the office was thick with a strange celebratory tension. The final partnership papers for the Civic Center were being drawn up. Champagne was on ice. Gideon was floating, not walking, through the open-plan office, shaking hands and accepting congratulations for a victory he hadn't earned. In the middle of this triumphant spectacle, a courier, a nondescript man in a simple uniform, walked up to Gideon's glass-walled office and handed him a crisp, heavy envelope. My name wasn't on it. My attorney's was. Inside that envelope was a very polite, very formal, very cold letter. It explained, in painstaking legal detail, that the foundational design sketches for the landmark Civic Center, the very soul of the project, were my legally copyrighted artistic works. They were not work for hire. They were mine. And if the firm and their new partners wished to use them, they would be required to pay a licensing fee. A fee that, by a strange and beautiful coincidence, now rivaled his entire annual salary. The ghost, it turned out, had learned how to charge for her haunting. The drive home from the office that day, the day Gideon had told me my place, was a blur of concrete and brake lights. I remember the steering wheel felt sticky under my palms, and the hum of the engine was a low, monotonous groan that seemed to be coming from inside my own skull. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. Like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that mattered, leaving behind a cold, empty space. 5 years. I had given this firm 5 years of my life, not just my time, from 8 in the morning until often past midnight, but my creativity, my very essence. I had poured myself into the concrete and steel of a dozen buildings, my fingerprints on blueprints that bore Gideon's signature. I pulled into the garage beneath my apartment building, the squeal of the tires echoing in the cavernous, empty space. I killed the engine. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. And in that silence, the dam broke. It wasn't a loud, theatrical breakdown. It was a quiet, internal collapse. A single tear traced a hot path down my cheek, then another. They were tears of pure, undiluted exhaustion. The exhaustion of constantly fighting to be seen, of having to prove my worth in every meeting, on every project, only to be relegated to the shadows the moment the spotlight came on. I leaned my forehead against the cool plastic of the steering wheel, and the flashbacks started, unbidden and sharp as shards of glass. It wasn't just the Civic Center. That was just the grand finale of a long, slow betrayal. I remembered the Riverwalk Pavilion 2 years in. It was a smaller project, but creatively ambitious. The client wanted something fluid, something that mimicked the flow of the water beside it. Gideon was stumped. He kept pushing for aggressive, angular designs, his signature style, all sharp lines and imposing forms. They were technically sound, but emotionally dead. The client was close to walking. I spent a weekend at home, not because anyone asked me to, but because the problem wouldn't let me go. I filled a sketchbook with concepts based on the laminar flow of water, on the gentle curve of a river stone. The final design, the one that won awards, was a direct trace of a sketch I had left on his desk that Monday morning, a suggestion I had offered. He presented it to the client as a sudden stroke of inspiration he'd had over the weekend. He'd even mimicked my language, talking about laminar flow as if he'd been studying fluid dynamics his whole life. When I saw the magazine article later, with his photo next to the headline Gideon Thorne's Organic Masterpiece, I felt a familiar, sickening twist in my stomach. I told myself it was for the good of the firm, that a win for him was a win for us all. That's the lie you tell yourself when you're afraid to rock the boat. You convince yourself that loyalty to the institution is more important than loyalty to yourself. Then there was the Harrison Tower incident. We were in a tense meeting with the structural engineers. They were saying our design for the cantilevered observation deck was impossible, that the physics wouldn't work without adding bulky, ugly support columns that would ruin the entire aesthetic. Gideon was getting red in the face, his charm curdling into blustering anger. He was a master of presentation, but when it came to the deep, gritty details of engineering and material science, his knowledge was a thin veneer. I saw the solution. It was a complex application of a tuned mass damper system, something I had written a paper on in grad school. I tried to speak up, to explain how we could counteract the oscillations without compromising the design. Gideon cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Alara, let the engineers handle the engineering." He said it with a patronizing little smile, as if I were a child playing with crayons. Later, when the engineers were gone, I drew the schematic on a whiteboard in his office. I explained it to him slowly, carefully. The next day, he called a new meeting with the engineers and presented my solution as his own, using my exact terminology, my exact drawing. The engineers were stunned, then impressed. Gideon was a genius again. I was just the silent woman in the back of the room, taking notes. Each memory was another layer of sediment, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. I had made excuses for him, for the firm, for years. I told myself this was how the industry worked. The senior partners were the rainmakers. The faces, people like me, were the architects in the truest sense of the word. The builders, the makers, the ones who did the actual work. I'd believed, with a foolish, desperate naivety, that if I just worked hard enough, if my designs were brilliant enough, that eventually the credit would have to follow. I thought competence was its own reward. I was wrong. Competence, without ownership, is just leverage for someone else. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was Maya, a junior architect I'd taken under my wing. The text was simple. "Are you okay?" He was a monster in there. She was young, barely 2 years out of school, but she saw it. She saw everything. She hadn't yet learned to normalize the toxicity, to dismiss the casual theft of a soul as just paying your dues. Her simple question was a crack of light in my dark, self-pitying cave. I wasn't crazy. It wasn't just in my head. Someone else saw it. That was the first shift. The second, the one that truly changed everything, happened when I finally dragged myself out of the car and up to my apartment. The place was quiet, sterile. I had spent so much time at the office that my own home felt like a hotel. I walked over to my bookshelf, a floor-to-ceiling unit filled with books on structural engineering, urban planning and architectural theory. Tucked away on a lower shelf was a small leather-bound sketchbook. It wasn't mine, it was my father's. My dad was a draftsman, not an architect, a draftsman. He worked for the city for 40 years, drawing up plans for public works projects, sewer lines, electrical grids, road layouts. He wasn't a visionary genius like Gideon pretended to be. He was a craftsman. He believed in clean lines, precise measurements, and the quiet dignity of a job well done. He was the one who taught me how to draw, how to see the world in 3 dimensions, how to find the beauty in a perfectly executed joint, or a gracefully load-bearing column. He passed away just before I started at Archer and Thorne, but his lessons were the foundation of everything I did. I pulled out his old sketchbook. The leather was worn smooth, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it, and the smell of old paper and graphite filled the air. It was a smell I associated with safety, with home. His drawings weren't of grand skyscrapers, they were of small, perfect things. The intricate gears of a watch, the delicate structure of a bird's wing, a detailed cross-section of a nautilus shell, and on the bottom corner of every single page, in small, neat block letters, was his signature, Ra Crowley. He had signed everything he ever drew. I remember asking him, why, once, when I was a little girl. "These are just practice," I'd said. "They're not for anything." He had tapped his pencil on the page. He said, "Elara, it doesn't matter if it's for a client or just for you. If you create something, you sign it. It's a record. It says, I was here. I made this. It's the only thing they can't take from you." And then I thought about my own sketchbooks. The ones for the firm were standard issue, with the Archer and Thorne logo embossed on the cover. We were required to use them, and anything in them was legally company property. I knew this. But for the past 3 years, ever since the Riverwalk Pavilion incident, I had started keeping a second set of books, private Moleskine notebooks I bought with my own money. In them I did my real work, my blue sky thinking, my initial concepts, the raw, unfiltered sparks of creativity. The Civic Center design, the one that had won the bid, was born in one of those Moleskines, drawn with my favorite fountain pen at my own kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. I had then transposed a cleaner, more sterile version into the company's sketchbook, but the original, the soul of it, was in my possession. It was my work, in my book, created on my time. And in the corner of every one of those crucial foundational sketches, I had started, almost subconsciously, to initial them. EMC, Elara Marie Crowley. A record. I was here. I made this. A cold, clear wave washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my despair, and leaving behind something hard and sharp. Resolve. Gideon's mistake wasn't just that he stole my work. His mistake was that he underestimated the ghost. He thought I was just a function, a tool to be used. He never considered that the ghost had a name, a history, and a father who had taught her to sign her work. He had told me my role was to support, not to lead. I smiled. A real smile this time. A thin, cold, dangerous smile. Fine. I would lead. But not for him, not for Archer and Thorne, for myself. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my mom or a friend. I scrolled through my contacts to a name I had saved over a year ago, after a particularly galling meeting where Gideon had passed off one of my energy-saving innovations as his own. I had known, on some level even then, that a day like this was coming. The contact read, Miss Davies, IP attorney. I pressed the call button. When she answered, her voice was as crisp and professional as I remembered. I said, Miss Davies, this is Elara Crowley. I think it's time we had a conversation about copyright. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about an overdue correction. It was about signing my name to my own life. The plan wasn't born in a flash of anger. It was constructed, piece by piece, over the next 2 weeks, with the same meticulous care I would use to design a skyscraper. It was a quiet coup, an act of architectural reclamation. My first meeting with Miss Davies was in a small, discreet office in a part of town filled with law firms and quiet money. She wasn't what I expected. She was young, sharp, and wore a minimalist black dress that made her look more like a gallery owner than a lawyer. But when she spoke, her words were steel. I laid out my collection of Moleskine sketchbooks on her polished mahogany table. There were 7 of them, a chronological record of my real work, my after-hours creativity, for the past 3 years. I explained the system at Archer and Thorne, the company-issued books, the work-for-hire clause in my employment contract. I told her everything: the Riverwalk Pavilion, the Harrison Tower, and finally the Civic Center. I opened the most recent Moleskine to the key pages, the double-page spread, where the entire concept for the Civic Center was laid out, the swooping roofline, the public plaza that integrated with the surrounding park, the innovative use of light wells. The DNA of the project was all there. And in the bottom right corner, my initials, EMC. Miss Davies listened without interrupting, her eyes scanning the drawings with an unnerving focus. She wasn't looking at them as art, she was looking at them as evidence. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. She was quiet for a long moment. The standard work-for-hire doctrine is strong, Miss Crawley, she began, her tone measured. In most cases, anything you create that is within the scope of your employment belongs to your employer. They will argue that even if you did this at home, it was for a work project, and therefore it's theirs. My heart sank a little. So there's nothing I can do. I didn't say that, she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. I said their argument is strong, but it's not ironclad. You have several things in your favor. First, you created these works outside of the office, using your own materials. That creates a physical separation from company resources. Second, you have a clear pattern of doing your conceptual blue sky work in these personal journals, while using their official sketchbooks for more derivative, developmental work. We can establish a pattern of practice. But the most important thing, she said, leaning forward and tapping a finger on one of my initials, is this. My initials, your signature, she corrected. And the fact that you registered the copyright for these specific sketches as artistic works 6 months ago. I just stared at her. I had almost forgotten. It was after the Harrison Tower incident, in a fit of frustration and a vague sense of self-preservation, that I had gone online to the Copyright Office website. I had uploaded high-resolution scans of my most important conceptual drawings from the Moleskines, including the early foundational sketches for what would become the Civic Center concept. I categorized them as 2D artistic works. I paid the $65 fee. I wasn't even sure if it would mean anything. It felt like a small, defiant act, like writing your name on the wall of your prison cell. I had mentioned it to Miss Davies in our initial phone call, but seeing her lock onto it now made it feel real. You see, she continued, Archer and Thorne will claim these are architectural plans, but they aren't. Not yet. At this stage, they are conceptual art. They are expressions of an idea. You, the artist, registered your claim to them before they were ever formally incorporated into a company project. This creates a fascinating and, for them, a very problematic legal gray area. They can't build your design without creating derivative works based on your copyrighted material, and for that they need your permission. Or, more precisely, a license. A license. The word hung in the air, full of potential. And what does a license cost? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Miss Davies smiled again, a genuine predatory smile this time. Well, Miss Crawley, that's the beautiful part. The value of a license is determined by the value of the underlying work, and given that the Civic Center project is valued at $500 million, I'd say it's worth a great deal. This wasn't just about a legal strategy anymore, it was about building a fortress. While Miss Davies was sharpening the legal swords, I was shoring up my own defenses. I knew that a legal battle could get ugly, and that Gideon would try to paint me as a disgruntled, mediocre employee. I needed more than just a copyright certificate. I needed allies. I needed proof of my value that went beyond my own assertions. My key ally was right there in the belly of the beast. Maya. I met her for coffee a few days after my meeting with Miss Davies. She was agitated, her knee bouncing under the table. She told me how Gideon had been parading around the office, calling the Civic Center his legacy project. She told me he had a new junior architect, the son of a major investor, following him around like a puppy. It was clear he was being groomed to take over the day-to-day management of the project, while I was being phased out. "He's erasing you, Alara," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "He's telling everyone the concept came to him in a dream." "A dream? I saw the sketches on your desk weeks before the pitch." I reached across the table and put a hand on her arm. "Maya, I need you to be careful, but I also need you to be my eyes and ears for the next 2 weeks." She looked at me, her eyes wide. "What are you going to do?" "I'm correcting the record," I said. "All I need from you is information. I need to know the exact timeline for the client partnership finalization. I need to know who the key players are on the client side. And I need you to forward any relevant emails or documents to my personal address. Can you do that?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "Absolutely. They shouldn't be able to do this." Her loyalty wasn't just about our friendship. It was about her own future. She saw in my story a chilling preview of what could happen to any talented woman at that firm. My fight was, in a small way, her fight too. The other piece of the puzzle was the client relationship. This was my hidden leverage, the asset Gideon never even knew I had. While he was charming the CEOs and city council members in boardrooms, I was the one in the trenches with the project managers, the engineers, and the mid-level client representatives. I was the one who answered their technical questions at 10 o'clock at night, the one who found solutions to their practical problems, the one who translated Gideon's grand, vague pronouncements into actionable plans. One man in particular was crucial: Arthur Sterling, the head of the consortium that was funding the Civic Center. He was an old-school real estate mogul, a man who had built his empire on a foundation of concrete and handshakes. He was known for being brutally pragmatic and having no patience for what he called architectural fluff. Gideon had schmoozed him, taken him to expensive lunches, and talked his ear off about vision and legacy. I, on the other hand, had spent 2 hours with him on a grainy video call, walking him through the passive heating and cooling systems I had designed for the building. He had peppered me with technical questions, and I had answered every one. At the end of the call he had grunted. A sound I came to learn was his version of a compliment. He said, "You're the one who actually knows how this thing works, aren't you, Crowley?" I had saved that email. Now I reread it, and it felt like a key. Sterling didn't care about Gideon's charisma. He cared about competence. He cared about his investment. He was a man who hated surprises and instability, and he was about to get a very big surprise. The final 2 weeks at Archer and Thorne were an exercise in surreal calm. I packed my personal belongings slowly, methodically. I wrote detailed handover documents, leaving my projects in immaculate condition. I was polite, professional, and completely opaque. Gideon treated me with a sort of distant pity, like a loyal pet that had to be put down. He even told me he'd be happy to give me a glowing recommendation, as long as I didn't try to apply to any of their direct competitors. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. On my second to last day, Maya sent me a text. "Partnership signing is tomorrow, 2 p.m. Champagne is already in the fridge." That was the signal. I called Miss Davies. "We're a go for tomorrow," I said. "The letter is ready," she replied. "The courier is booked for 2:15, right in the middle of their celebration." I thought that had a certain poetic flair. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my quiet apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window. I held my father's old sketchbook in my lap. This wasn't just about a building anymore. It was about every woman who had ever been told to be quiet in a meeting. It was for every person who had their idea stolen by a charismatic superior. It was for every ghost in every machine who did the work that made the world turn, only to be told their role was to support, not to lead. It wasn't about revenge. It was about architecture. It was about taking a solid foundation, a hidden structure of truth and competence, and building something on top of it that was so strong, so clear, and so undeniable that no one could ever tear it down or claim it as their own. It was about building my own house. My last day, it felt like the air had a different pressure. I walked into the Archer and Thorne office for the final time, my security pass already feeling like a foreign object in my hand. The place was buzzing, not with the usual hum of productivity, but with the giddy electric energy of a big win. People were gathered in small, laughing clusters. The big conference room, the one with the panoramic city view, was being prepped for the signing ceremony. White tablecloths, floral arrangements, rows of champagne flutes. It was a victory party, and I was a ghost at the feast. I spent the morning in my now barren cubicle, methodically deleting personal files from my computer and writing out a final sterile handover email to my department head. No one spoke to me beyond polite, awkward goodbyes. I was yesterday's news, a minor footnote in the grand story of Gideon Thorne's triumph. Gideon himself swept past my desk once, on his way to greet the first of the partners arriving. He gave me a brief, tight-lipped nod, the kind you give a doorman. He was already in another world, a world of handshakes and press releases, a world where I no longer existed. It was perfect. His arrogance was the final crucial component of my plan. My phone, sitting face down on the desk, vibrated silently. It was Maya. They're all in the conference room. Sterling is here. The mood is electric. I looked at the clock on my screen. 2:05 p.m. Any minute now. I had instructed Miss Davies that the courier was not to be early. The timing had to be precise. The blow had to land not before the party, but right at its peak. Another vibration. Gideon is making a speech, talking about his singular vision. I think I'm going to be sick. I could picture it perfectly. Gideon, standing at the head of the long, polished table, his back to the stunning view, his voice, a smooth, confident baritone, filling the room. He would be talking about inspiration, about the heavy burden of genius. He would be using the words I wrote in my Moleskine, the concepts I bled for, and weaving them into a narrative of his own solitary struggle and ultimate victory. The partners, including the pragmatic Mr. Sterling, would be nodding along, captivated by the performance. 2:16 p.m. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a picture message from Maya, a photo, slightly blurry, taken from her seat at the side of the room. It showed a man in a simple courier uniform, standing at the open door of the conference room, holding out a large, crisp envelope to Gideon's assistant. The next text came a few seconds later. She's taking it to him. Now. He's stopping his speech. He looks annoyed. I could feel my heart pounding, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. This was it. The moment the first wrecking ball hit the wall, he's opening it. He's reading. His smile is gone. I closed my eyes, picturing his face, the charming, charismatic mask dissolving, the confusion, followed by a flicker of disbelief, then the dawning, sickening wave of comprehension. The room would be silent now, the celebratory atmosphere draining away, replaced by a confused, awkward tension. He's looking around the room, like he's looking for someone. He's pale, really pale. He just whispered something to his lawyer. The lawyer is reading the letter now. Oh wow, the lawyer looks like he just swallowed a bug. The texts were coming in a frantic stream now, a real-time narration of a carefully orchestrated demolition. This wasn't a loud, explosive demolition. It was a silent internal collapse. The foundation was giving way. My desk phone rang. The display showed Gideon's extension. I let it ring, once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. A few seconds later, my cell phone rang, Gideon's number. I smiled, a small, private smile, and silenced the call. The ghost does not answer when the haunted man calls. Maya's texts continued. They've paused the signing. People are whispering. Mr. Sterling is just sitting there, staring at Gideon. His face is like stone. Gideon and his lawyer just left the room. They look frantic. The silent takeover was in full effect. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a scene. I had simply, quietly, reclaimed what was mine. And in doing so, I had pulled the cornerstone out of his entire billion-dollar project. They couldn't proceed. They couldn't sign the partnership. They couldn't break ground. They couldn't do anything. The plans they had, the beautiful renderings, and the complex financial models, were all based on a set of drawings they now knew they had no legal right to use. I stood up and picked up my small box of personal items, a coffee mug, a photo of my dad, a single pristine moleskine notebook. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. As I passed the big glass wall of the conference room, I could see the chaos inside. The partners were standing now, gathered in confused knots. I saw Mr. Sterling, his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. He wasn't looking at the other partners. He was looking out, through the glass, his eyes scanning the office. He was looking for the one person who knew how this thing actually worked. My own department head, a man who had passively watched Gideon take credit for my work for years, intercepted me by the elevators. "Alara," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "What's going on?" Gideon is in a panic. He's looking for the original concept files for the Civic Center. I gave him a calm, placid smile. "The foundational concepts?" I asked, feigning helpfulness. As I'm sure Gideon will recall, he came up with those himself. A singular vision, I believe he called it. I'm sure he has them somewhere. The color drained from his face as he understood. I turned and pressed the elevator button. It was over. I had spent 5 years building things for Gideon Thorne. Today, for the first time, I had torn something down, and it felt like the most constructive thing I had ever done. It wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. The scales, after 5 long years, were finally beautifully level. The power shift didn't happen overnight, but it was as swift and irreversible as a tectonic plate grinding into a new position. The immediate aftermath of what the office staff started calling the letter was a state of suspended animation. The Civic Center project, the firm's crowning achievement, was frozen solid. According to Maya's intel, the celebratory champagne went back into the fridge, and the partnership signing was indefinitely postponed. Gideon's panic, at first, was a private, contained fire. He and the firm's legal team tried to handle it internally. My phone buzzed with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Lawyers, I assumed. I didn't answer. All communication was routed through Miss Davies, who acted as an impenetrable, polite, and utterly implacable firewall. Her response to their initial blustering threats of a lawsuit was, I was told, a cheerful invitation to please proceed. She knew, and they were quickly realizing, that a public lawsuit would mean discovery. And discovery would mean my Moleskine sketchbooks, my copyright registrations, and the sworn testimony of people like Maya would all become public record. It would be a catastrophic public unmasking of their star architect. The real turning point came about 48 hours later. It was a call from a number I did recognize, Arthur Sterling's private line. His assistant put me through immediately. His voice was gravelly, devoid of any pleasantries. "Crowley," he barked. "What the hell is going on? I've got a $500 million project sitting dead in the water because my visionary architect apparently doesn't own his own vision. Talk to me." This was the moment, the one that mattered more than any legal letter. This was about client trust. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice calm and even, "what's going on is a simple matter of intellectual property ownership. The foundational concept for the Civic Center is a copyrighted artistic work that belongs to me. Archer and Thorne were aware that I was the primary designer on the project, but they seemed to have had a misunderstanding about the legal status of the work. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. "He stood in front of me and sold me a car he didn't have the keys to. Is that the long and short of it?" "That's a fair assessment, sir," I replied. "So what do you want?" he asked, his tone shifting from angry to purely transactional. "A payout? Is this a shakedown?" I took a deep breath. "With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, this isn't about a shakedown. This is about integrity. I believe in that project. I poured my heart and soul into that design. I want to see it built, and I want to see it built correctly. But I will not have my work used without credit and fair compensation. It's a matter of principle." I let that hang in the air for a moment before adding, "And of course there would be a licensing fee." He grunted. "How much of a fee?" "That's a conversation my attorney would have with the firm," I said smoothly. "But my priority, Mr. Sterling, has always been the project itself." This was the truth, or at least a version of it. The money was the weapon, the leverage, but the real prize was the project. He grunted again. "I don't like instability, Crowley. I don't like drama. I like buildings that stand up and investments that pay off. Gideon Thorne is starting to look like a very poor investment." He hung up without saying goodbye. The client exodus began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, lethal emails. Sterling didn't pull out of the project entirely. Instead, he put it on ice and began exercising the due diligence clauses in his preliminary agreement with Archer and Thorne. He sent in his own auditors, his own legal team. The firm was suddenly under a microscope, and the pressure was immense. The story, inevitably, began to leak to the architectural press. Not the full dramatic details, but whispers of creative ownership disputes and project delays surrounding the Civic Center. The firm's pristine reputation began to crack. Gideon's desperate countermove came a week after my resignation. He called me himself, bypassing the lawyers. He sounded terrible. His smooth, confident voice was strained, frayed at the edges. "Ilara," he began, trying for a tone of weary camaraderie. "Listen, I think this has all been a terrible misunderstanding." I stayed silent. "Look," he continued, his voice cracking a little. "The firm, we value you. I value you. You're a brilliant architect. Maybe I didn't always express that properly." It was the closest he would ever come to an apology, and it was pathetic. "Let's just fix this. Come back. We'll give you a senior partner title, a real one. We'll double your salary. We'll give you a public title as co-lead designer on the Civic Center. Whatever you want. Let's just make this go away." For a fleeting second, I felt a flicker of the old loyalty, the old desire to just make things easy, to smooth things over. It was the part of me that had been conditioned for 5 years to support, not to lead. Then I thought of my father's sketchbook. I thought of Gideon's condescending smile. "Gideon," I said, and my voice was perfectly calm, perfectly cold. "You're not listening. This isn't a negotiation for a new job. I'm not an employee you can placate with a raise. I am the legal owner of the core asset your entire project is built on. We are not colleagues anymore. We are two separate business entities, and you are in breach of my copyright. Goodbye." I hung up the phone. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had just signed his professional death warrant. The power had shifted completely. He had no more carrots to offer, only sticks, and his sticks were all broken. He had nothing. I had everything. A few days later, Maya sent me a text. "Sterling's auditors are everywhere. They're going through every project file from the last 5 years. People are terrified." He hadn't just sold a car. He didn't have the keys to. He had built a career out of it, and someone was finally checking the VIN numbers. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic showdown in a boardroom. It was quieter, sadder, and far more satisfying. It happened 2 weeks after my last day, in a small independent coffee shop near my apartment. I was there meeting with a freelance graphic designer, starting to lay the groundwork for my own small firm, a company of one for now. The name I had chosen was Crowley Design and Architecture. My name. Front and center, the bell on the door chimed, and I glanced up. It was Gideon. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and the charismatic glow he always carried around him was gone, replaced by a gray, desperate pallor. He saw me, and his face was a complicated mask of anger and pleading. He walked over to my table. "Alara," he said. His voice was a hoarse whisper. My designer colleague looked up, confused. I gave her a small nod, and she quietly gathered her things and moved to another table. "Gideon," I replied, my tone neutral. I didn't get up. I didn't invite him to sit. I just looked at him. "You've destroyed me," he said, the words tumbling out. "Sterling is threatening to sue the firm into oblivion for fraud. The board is calling for my resignation. My father, my own father, won't take my calls. All of it, because of you." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I let the silence stretch. I refused to absorb his blame, to let him make this my fault. This was all of his own making. "I didn't destroy you, Gideon," I said finally, my voice soft but clear as glass. "Your own actions did. I just sent an invoice for them." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "An invoice? You're calling this an invoice? This was a public execution. You could have come to me. We could have worked something out privately." "Worked something out?" I asked. And for the first time a bit of heat entered my voice, like the way we worked things out on the Riverwalk Pavilion or the Harrison Tower. Was I supposed to trust that you would suddenly, after 5 years of systematically erasing my name from my own work, decide to be fair? You had every chance to do the right thing, day after day, year after year. You chose not to. He sagged, the anger draining out of him, leaving only a pathetic desperation. "What do you want, Alara? Just tell me, what's the number? How much to make this all stop?" I leaned forward slightly. This was the moment I had replayed in my mind 100 times. The final, quiet checkmate. "It was never about the money, Gideon. You still don't get it. It was about the credit. But since you're so focused on transactions, let's talk about one. You once gave me some very clear career advice." He looked at me, confused. "You told me my role was to support, not to lead," I said, holding his gaze. "And you were right. My role as your employee was to support you. But I'm not your employee anymore, and I'm no longer supporting you. The structure is all yours now, Gideon. I hope you built it on a solid foundation." He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He had no reply. There was nothing left to say. I had taken his own condescending words and turned them into the epitaph of his career. I stood up, leaving my half-finished coffee on the table. "Goodbye, Gideon." I walked away without looking back. The news came a week later, not from Maya, but from a major industry trade publication. "Gideon Thorne resigns, from Archer and Thorne amidst project dispute." The article was carefully worded, full of corporate speak about creative differences and a new direction for the firm, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. He was out, fired, erased. The new reality began to take shape. Arthur Sterling, true to his word, had no love for drama, but an immense respect for competence. His consortium officially terminated its agreement with Archer and Thorne, citing a breach of confidence. 2 days after that, my phone rang. It was Sterling's assistant again. The meeting was at a neutral location, a private dining room in an old, quiet hotel. "It was just me, Mr. Sterling, and 2 of his top people. My attorney, Miss Davies, was with me." Sterling got straight to the point. "Crowley," he said, "I've reviewed your original designs. I've had my own people look at your technical specs. You're the real deal." "Thank you, sir," I said. "My consortium still wants to build this building," he continued. "It's a landmark, a legacy. But we need an architect we can trust. The design is yours, legally, ethically, creatively. The question is, are you capable of leading the project to completion?" This was the question, the real question, the one Gideon had told me I wasn't meant to answer. I looked him straight in the eye. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady and strong, "I haven't just designed this building. I've designed its systems. I've solved its engineering challenges, and I've built the relationships with the very contractors and engineers you'll need to hire. I am the only person who can build it to the standard you expect." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he broke into a wide, surprising smile. "Good," he said, extending a hand across the table. "Then let's get to work. Crowley Design and Architecture, I presume." I shook his hand. The grip was firm, solid, like a foundation. "Yes, sir," I said. "Crowley Design, welcome." It wasn't about revenge. I have to keep telling myself that. Even now, looking back, the word revenge feels too small, too emotional for what happened. Revenge is a fire that consumes. What I did was more like architecture. It was a deconstruction and a rebuilding. I took a structure that was fundamentally unsound, a building whose facade was beautiful, but whose foundation was rotten with lies, and I carefully dismantled it. Then I salvaged the valuable materials, my designs, my integrity, my name, and started building something new, something honest, something of my own. My new office isn't the grand, sweeping space that Archer and Thorne occupied. It's a modest, sun-drenched studio, with exposed brick walls and large windows that look out over the city. There aren't any junior partners or layers of bureaucracy. For now, it's just me, Maya, who gave her notice the day Gideon's resignation was announced, and a handful of carefully chosen consultants. The big conference table is a simple butcher block, and the coffee machine is a small one that hisses and sputters. But the coffee is good and it's ours. On the wall behind my desk, there are two things hanging. One is a simple black frame. Inside, protected by museum-quality glass, is the double-page spread from my Moleskine notebook, the foundational sketch of the Civic Center. In the bottom right corner, my initials, EMC, are clear and sharp. It's a reminder, not of the battle, but of the origin. It's a reminder of my father, and his simple advice, "Sign your work." It says, "I was here. I made this." The other framed item is smaller. It's the final, insulting email I received from Gideon's HR department, the one confirming the termination of my employment and coldly listing the corporate property I was required to return. To some, it might seem strange to frame a memory of such a painful moment. But to me, it's a different kind of foundation. It's a reminder of what happens when you allow your value to be defined by others. It's a reminder of the price of silence. Every day I look at it, and I remember the feeling of being erased, and I renew my vow to never let that happen again, to myself or to anyone who works with me. The Civic Center project is moving forward. Under my leadership, my new title is Principal Architect. My name is on the contracts, on the blueprints, on the press releases. It's a strange feeling, after so many years in the shadows, to stand in the spotlight. But I'm learning that the light isn't something to be afraid of when you've earned the right to be in it. It's not about ego or fame. It's about authorship. It's about taking responsibility, not just for the wins, but for the entire process. So I'm talking to you now, directly, to anyone who is watching this. Maybe you're the ghost in your own machine. Maybe you're the one doing the work while someone else takes the credit. Maybe you've been told that your role is to support, not to lead. Your situation might be different from mine. Your industry, your boss, your specific injustice. But the feeling, that slow, grinding erosion of the soul, is universal. Please hear me when I say this. Your work has value. Your ideas have value. You have value. Don't wait for someone else to recognize it. Don't wait for them to give you permission to lead. Start signing your work, even if it's just for you. Keep a record. Build your own foundation, privately and quietly. Cultivate your allies. Understand your own leverage. You might feel powerless right now, but competence is a powerful currency. Integrity is a powerful asset. The truth has its own gravitational pull. Your story doesn't have to end in the shadows. You have the power to be the architect of your own life. It's not easy, and it can be terrifying, but the alternative, a life spent building someone else's dream, on a foundation of your own silent resentment, is far, far worse. If my story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen, then do me a favor, like this video. Leave a comment below, and tell me, without giving away any private details, of course, about a time you felt your own work was overlooked. Let's create a community here, a space where we can validate each other's experiences. Share this with someone you think needs to hear it. And please, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because this conversation is just beginning, and it helps so much to know that I'm not alone in it. Thank you for listening.